Welcome to Flash Drive, a wrap-up of the week that was in news for your Friday commute, the cliff notes, the cheat sheet, whatever you need to keep up with any conversation. I'm Georgie Tunny.
And I'm James Law.
And this is Flash Drive. J-Law, what a week.
What a week.
There's
been a lot happening.
I feel like we're midway through Feb, though, and January felt like 18 years. February's felt like 2 days.
Well, yeah, that's true. It has gotten faster.
Yeah, it's gone really, really quickly. And maybe that's because there's just been so many stories for us to get our teeth into. But there's been one that's kind of dominated global headlines this week. It's generated interest from sports fans, non-sports fans, everyone in between, because it centres around the world #1 tennis player, the controversial superstar, Novak Djokovic. He spoke exclusively to the BBC in his first interview since getting deported from Australia on the eve of the Australian Open. And one of the biggest talking points and revelations came when the 20-time major winner said he wasn't vaccinated yet, he had no intention of getting vaccinated, and he said that he would skip Grand Slams if they had vaccination mandates.
Because the principles of decision-making on my body are more important than any title or anything else.
I think, J-Law, the interviewer there really summed up maybe the world. And we should mention too that this whole interview, you can see it on the Flash platform, the whole exclusive interview with the BBC with Novak Djokovic, because the interview there just asking Novak Djokovic, why? Why would you risk, becoming the greatest of all time, statistically anyway, and not getting, maybe missing out on the chance to win that 21st title, the 22nd Grand Slam, because you won't get vaccinated?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, I watched the whole, it goes for about 28 minutes, the whole conversation. It's really fascinating. When I watched it, I think he does come across as pretty reasonable. Like, he can speak well. He answered all the questions in a really upfront way. I mean, essentially his point is he believes that his power to choose, outweighs anything else. He sees himself as an elite athlete who, is really careful about what he puts in his body, and he isn't making a statement about anyone else. He just believes that he should be able to decide whether he has the vaccine or not. He says he's pro-vaccine, but just for himself, he wants more information before he gets the jab.
And I think it is pertinent of us just to remind our listeners that Novak Djokovic has had these kind of thoughts and feelings previously. He's made no secret of the fact that he is a big wellness warrior and has a different or alternative view when it comes to certain scientific facts. And I just thought I might remind people of things that he has said in the past.
I've seen people, and I know some people that through that energetical transformation, through the power of prayer, through the power of gratitude, they manage to turn the most toxic food or maybe most polluted water into the most healing water, because water reacts. And
water is alive.
Scientists have proven that obviously in the experiment, that molecules of the water react to our emotions, to what is being said.
So I've not fact-checked that. However, I just want to make the point once again that Novak Djokovic has had controversial views in the past, but I do think that the interview itself...
Whoa. You can't just breeze past that.
What do you mean? Water's alive.
Prayer
it's molecules
and water and
reacts to things.
It sounds like science to me.
Well, polluted water, if you just have positive thinking, that is the cleanest stream of water you may ever intake.
Right, so one might question where Novak's getting his information.
Yes. Oh, yes, for sure. But it does actually bring an interesting point, because part of that interview, you're right, he was sounding quite reasonable, quite rational. He's pro-vaccine. He's very, very staunchly saying that he is not anti-vax. However, he's still unvaccinated. So it raises this larger question. Can you actually be unvaccinated but not anti-vax?
Well, to me, it's as if he lives in a vacuum, right? I understand his position, right? I think he's probably being extra cautious because his body is his career. So he wants to be as healthy as possible. He thinks there's not enough information about the vaccine. There 100% is enough information.
Yes.
He would be fine if he got it.
Get vaccinated.
Of course. But that's his position, right? But it's a really selfish position.
Yes.
That's what he fails to understand. His, stance doesn't just affect him. He's the number one. So I think he probably does have a selfish mindset. As an elite athlete, you need to have a selfish mindset. But his position is untenable in this world where it spreads like wildfire. And, he probably did spread it to other people. It's really selfish.
Well, he goes on to say within the interview, he talks a little bit about his deportation and that he doesn't believe it was right. He was prepared not to come to Australia because he knew about the vaccine mandates, but he truly believed that with his border exemption and his passes that he was going to be allowed entry into this country. Did you believe that at face value?
Yeah, like they did run through every step of that, and I feel like there was a loophole and he found out about it and exploited it. And, the way that the federal government handled this was a bit of a mess. I think he did everything by the book. When he got that medical exemption, those medical exemptions were given out not knowing who applied for them. It's like, it's anonymous. So, he did the process correctly. But then, he was there, then he was not, then he was let out for 4 days, then he was deported.
Then he was gone.
It was a mess. But he fronted up and said before he came to Australia that he went to that notorious photo shoot and interview with a sports magazine knowing he had COVID. And he sort of said that was an error of judgment or something. That didn't wash with me. Devil's
advocate here. Because I agree, obviously, I think the same. That's not good. That's not great. However, I would say the discussion, the dialogue around coronavirus, COVID-19, the science behind it, the facts behind it here in Australia doesn't necessarily carry on to Serbia and potentially Novak Djokovic, just in terms of vaccination rates itself. We are a highly, highly, highly vaxxed country. Serbia does not have our vaccination rates. They're a lot lower there. And I think there is a very different mindset when it comes to coronavirus. Of course, I don't think it was Djokovic's intention to make anyone sick. I don't think that's up for debate. I don't think that was his intention.
No.
But of course he could have. He could have. I just don't think that he thought about it, doesn't think about it in the same way.
I think that's it exactly. He just is thinking about that next Grand Slam and, his game and staying on top of his game. And I think that's the only way you get to be in his position. Do you think that this stance of his, he was out there and he said, if my stance means I can't compete at the French Open or Wimbledon, so be it. Do you think that this means that he won't end up being, the greatest of all time?
Oh, it's hard as well because in my mind, the greatest of all time doesn't necessarily just relate or correlate to titles won and statistics. I know that there is that. So by a pure numbers perspective, at the moment it's Rafael Nadal because he's won 21 Grand Slams. There's an argument going on between who's the greatest of all time, Margaret Court or Serena Williams, because Serena Williams has 23 Grand Slams and Margaret Court has 24. So, but I think that in this day and age, a lot of people would say that Serena Williams is the GOAT rather than Margaret Court because it is that, younger generation push for a change in the discussion. When it comes to Novak Djokovic, I don't think he's everyone's favourite player.
Nope.
I think that he is possibly the greatest player that we've ever seen just because he has been able to neutralise other great players like Roger Federer and Rafa and defeat them easily at a lot of points in his career. I find it so bizarre in my mind, and probably the hardest thing for me to rectify is that someone like Joker, who, J-Law, you were right in saying, as an elite athlete has that almost selfish perspective that, has to put themselves above everything and all of this, and he loves winning and he loves everything that comes with it. He loves the status and all of that. It seems so bizarre and crazy to me that he's willing to not be, even statistically, the greatest of all time over something as simple as getting jabbed.
Yeah. It seems like he genuinely has that feeling about individual freedom is more important than anything else, which, I mean, it's lots of people feel that way.
Well, I was going to say, we're seeing that debate, though, here too. So even though Novak Djokovic was adamant that he did not have the power to incite anti-vax sentiment, which is why ultimately he was deported from this country, we are seeing it still here, though, and it is centering around vaccination mandates in the workplace. I mean, just this week we've seen BHP say that, they're probably going to lose 700 workers because they just refuse to get vaxxed now that they are rolling out that mandate throughout the country. And also, I mean, we've seen those protests constantly around Canberra and Parliament House, people being very noisy, blowing horns and things like that because they don't want this to be mandated.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, at least we're not like in the US where sort of this sense of freedom is like runs in their blood, you know, like I think Australians are much more willing to take one for the team.
Yeah. Well, I think that totally though. I think that our national identity, even in, this current state of the world, which everyone's self-interested, is a lot, put a lot higher than, what's best for the community. But I think in Australia, there's still this underlying social contract where we think that, it is good to help everyone.
It's not, you're not doing it to, as not just to protect yourself. It's about your nan.
Yes.
It's about your friends. It's about trying to limit the spread. And that's the one thing that I don't think Novak gets.
No. Novak, get better friends.
Yeah, and get better, read a bit better where you're getting your advice.
What do you mean?
Yeah,
molecules.
Yeah, stop
Happy
praying.
molecules.
Stop praying about toxic food and your toxic water.
We had so much else going on in the news agenda this week, namely a particular interview, another interview. We're going, hard on the interviews this week, but it was with Jenny Morrison, wife of Scott, who revealed that she was actually pretty upset over that photo op with Australian of the Year, Grace Tame.
I just found it a little bit disappointing because we'll welcome you in our home.
That was Jenny, and she's made those comments in an exclusive interview with 60 Minutes. But she made those comments and her husband did this.
But everyone knows the chorus.
Yeah, go.
Oh.
Take me to the April sun in Cuba. Oh. Take me to the April sun in Cuba. I can't remember the words.
Oh.
Come on, Jen, get into it.
Ugh, it still makes me cringe.
There's part of me that has to hand it to him. I can't play a ukulele, but also just the absolute confidence that he knew the words to that song.
He did not.
He did not.
He did not know the
We
words.
quickly found that out. So everyone knows the words to the chorus. I don't know them.
He probably should have rehearsed it a bit more.
Maybe a little bit.
He's got nothing else to do.
Look, it was an interesting piece of television. It was an interesting interview. It was an interesting piece of journalism. But J-Law, was it successful for the Prime Minister? And why maybe did the coalition, want to take that route? Why did they want this story out there?
Look, I think it was really smart. I think a lot of people were like, this is gross, soft interview, trying to give him an opportunity to, slink out of his responsibilities and things like that. But I don't think it was that at all. I think that Jenny Morrison very much is his secret weapon. That's how they kind of were pitching the whole story. And I thought that she came across great in that interview. I think she did go a long way towards humanising him. You and I in our job, we sort of listen to every ScoMo utterance pretty much. Every time he gets up, we listen to him speak. We kind of know what he's going to say. And it does get a bit monotonous. And I think probably a lot of Australians might feel that way. It's the curse of being a Prime Minister. But then she comes in and I think she does go a long way to humanise him. She had some interesting things to say, I think, she was asked about the criticism of him that sometimes he can lack empathy, that maybe he didn't understand women. And I thought her answer was really interesting where she kind of conceded that sometimes in his professional capacity he comes across that way, but that she said he's really task-oriented and he's not so much interested in feelings and more about getting things done. You can agree or disagree with that, but I think that's a good answer and it makes him look good. And I don't know. I thought that it was a smart thing for him to do, and I don't think it would have harmed him at all.
I think that using Jenny Morrison as a secret weapon, I can understand that, because it does, it sort of amps up this presidential style debate, which we're probably going to see heading into the federal election. Do you want Anthony Albanese? Do you want Scott Morrison? And a lot of the discourse and narrative around Scott Morrison is that he's a family man, and that's where Jenny comes in. And we can see that. There's proof of that. We know what's going on with their home unit. The same cannot be said really at the moment for Anthony Albanese. We might know some things, but it was very, very interesting and calculated, I agree with you, for that to be the angle. Jenny Morrison spoke for the first, 10 minutes of that?
Yeah.
Of that whole story, a 15-minute story. She has the floor for 10 minutes of it. It was very, very pointed that she was the focus. And because Anthony Albanese isn't married at the moment, doesn't necessarily have that same weapon to fight with.
Yeah, and people know, like, the ukulele thing was awkward, but remember that they...
What do you mean? Take me to the airport. I don't know the words either.
Yeah. But, that fits with this daggy dad image, right? That he wants us to think of him in these kind of shorthand ways. And that helps to underline that he's a daggy dad, and his poor daughter's sitting there slowly cringing as he plays.
They were harmonising though.
Yeah, they were. Hey, what did you think? Like, some of the criticism that came out of it was, about what she said about Grace Tame.
Yes.
I thought that her criticism was pretty gentle. It wasn't like she said, oh my God, she was horrible to us. She just said it would have been nice for her to be more polite.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it was actually a ploy from the coalition. I don't doubt that is, Jenny Morrison's feelings about it. I do think that was it. However, the next day it was really interesting to see that then coalition MPs, the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, Barnaby Joyce, both came out after previously not really making comment about it and saying, well, I also thought Grace Tame was rude. But they hadn't really said anything until all the headlines came out and said Jenny Morrison slams
Gives them
2021 Australian of the Year. Yeah, so I found that probably the most interesting bit of the criticism, and maybe just ever so slightly a win for the coalition in that whole debate. With the general public.
And what about the Hawaii thing? There was one opinion piece that said that that by Scott Morrison putting Jenny forward, it was sort of as if he threw her under the bus and made it as if it was her decision to stay in Hawaii when everyone was like, come back, our country is burning.
Oh, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I found that very odd because, again, like we were saying, Jenny's talking for 10 minutes, but he's there. It's not that Karl Stefanovic was having a sit down with Jenny Morrison. Scott Morrison was also on the couch. So that bit for me was actually quite weird because it was like they were talking as though he wasn't there. Yeah. When he so obviously was.
Anyway, they promised there'll be an Albo one coming up.
Oh,
so
okay.
We'll see what he'll probably have
What's he singing?
No, he'll get behind the decks. He's a DJ. Or he'll do some of that.
Bit of Daft Punk?
Yeah, maybe.
I sound older than them both. I'm like, yeah, Daft Punk. I know things. All right, so that was one of the other headlines that we had this week. Now, the other dominating one, and I have to preface this, neither J-Lo nor myself are military experts.
Speak for yourself.
I mean, sorry. However, we've re-enrolled ourselves in like an international studies course or, a political science course, and we've had to really this week because we're trying to unpack what the hell is going on in Eastern Europe. We've been trying on Flash all week to figure it out. Basically, between Russia and Ukraine, the threat of Russia invading Ukraine and what that could mean for the larger geopolitical discourse, I think it's centering around whether or not World War III is a legitimate thing. Could it be credible? Could it actually happen? What that looks like? Do you think that it is actually possible right now with the state of affairs and everyone, the major players, NATO, the US?
I don't think anyone wants that.
No,
I don't think it will come to that. I think it's clear that all the major powers are trying as hard as they can for a diplomatic solution to this crisis. But it's really interesting. I mean, what is Putin up to here?
Yeah.
Like, what's his end game? We sort of examined that this week. What did you find out?
We kind of narrowed it down to 3 things. So at very base level, he is a fan of history. So he's a revisionist. The fact that Ukraine is a free country at the moment, after previously being a former Soviet republic, that irks him a little bit, essentially. So there's that. There's just like a feeling of he would love to have that back under Russia's control, just for the look of it, really, I think, at number 1. Also just I think this really genuine and huge driving factor is that he wants Russia to be a superpower and to be recognized as a superpower again by Western forces, Western allies, but also by the Russian people. Because the pandemic has been really tough on Russia. There's been more than 620,000 deaths, I think it is. The cost of living there is skyrocketing. So this kind of show of force, without actually having any physical force yet or violence yet, no physical invasion, troops on the ground into Ukraine, but it's still been able to spark this huge international conversation. And God, I can only imagine the behind the scenes meetings that, all these world superpowers are having, is a real show of strength, I think, in Putin's mind for his people to be like, we're actually still a really big player in the world right now.
Yeah.
Like a really big player.
Exactly.
So it could be that. But then I think as well, just at the heart, I think it's just a little bit of a reminder to Ukraine, who is moving further and further ahead as a democracy and, taking on Western ideals and values and those kind of ideologies, I guess, to not get too far ahead of themselves, because I don't think he wants a flourishing Ukraine is not great for Russia. And it's not in terms of Vladimir Putin's Russia, because his whole concept of what makes Russia strong is him being the leader and that autocracy surviving.
That's it. Yeah, that's really interesting. And, I think one of the things that we reported on this week is that the idea that what Putin's up to is trying to stop Ukraine joining NATO.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a smoke screen.
The official line. Yeah.
Where it's much more, I think, what you were saying about trying to stop Ukraine prospering in the West.
Yes. Yeah. So it's just one of those things that it can be quite a complicated and convoluted topic, which scares a lot of people, and especially a lot of people in Australia, we might not necessarily know why we should care about that kind of stuff, but when you delve into a little bit deeper and you can see that that sort of situation could be played out again in multiple areas of the world, it just makes it that little bit more interesting, which is I guess why geopolitics are interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah.
All right, J-Lo, quick shout out. The platform itself, Flash, for which we both work. Reminder to our listeners, what is it?
Yeah, so it's a brand new streaming service. This week I wanted to shout out some of the great channels that you can get on Flash. So we have Sky News Australia, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, USA Today, Fox News, Times Now of India, NHK Japan. You name it, we've pretty much got every corner of the globe covered with our news channels. So come and check us out, $8 a month, but you can trial it for 14 days free, flashnews.com.au.
Yeah, and just a reminder that full BBC exclusive interview with Novak Djokovic, he hasn't done any other media. That is available on the Flash platform. So just those kinds of things, you can get that content, which no one else really can have.
Yeah, that's it. And I know that you've caught up on an interesting doco this week. What did you watch?
Yeah, I watched this doco from the United States. It's called Beyond Men and Masculinity. Seems really apt at the moment, actually, in a lot of the conversations that are going on in Australia and around the world about toxic masculinity and, the rise of feminism and can feminists only be women, all that stuff. But it's really interesting because it talks about and goes into boys and how really America, but the world itself, is raising boys and this fear for them showing emotions. And I just know, because I can't relate to that experience because, I'm a woman and I was a girl growing up and I know all those pressures, but to see it played out in this doco, I found really interesting. They had a whole bunch of men's circles, I guess you call them, where men can actually talk about their feelings, what they're thinking. And it could be something as simple as, I was a bit scared today. And someone's like, oh, why were you scared? And they were like, oh, well, I had to give a speech and I didn't know what to do, and then I thought I'd get embarrassed, and then I just didn't really say anything. So that's where I went. And I found it really interesting, and I recommend everyone watching it because it does give you a different point of view, which is, the whole point of a lot of the content on Flash. You're seeing all different kinds of views. But it's interesting, especially this topic, because I think one of the best thing about being a woman is that you're so open in conversations and you've got your girlfriends and you talk about absolutely everything, whereas you can stick two boys in a room for hours and all they'll say is, oh yeah, so this is my mate James.
Yeah.
Like, what do you talk about? So I watched that. I recommend it. I found it very
It's
interesting.
a secret society that us men talk about.
It's Fight Club.
That's it. Hey, other thing I wanted to shout out about that's coming to Flash next Wednesday, February 23, is the Sky News exclusive doco MH370, The Final Search. So Pete Stefanovic, this will be really big. Pete Stefanovic is the host and investigative reporter behind this new documentary, and it promises some breakthroughs in the search for MH370, which, if you remember, was the plane that disappeared off the face of the earth, taking 239 people with it. And it's going to be really interesting to see 8 years on where that search is up to and what new little clues are coming out.
So that's next week.
That's on Wednesday at 8 p.m. And then after that, you can catch up on demand anytime.
Guys, it's simple. Just get Flash.
Get Flash.
Get Flash. Get Flash. I'll be back next week, will you?
Yes, I'll be here.
All right. We'll chat then. Thanks so much for listening and joining us for another episode of Flash Drive. We've got another 1,000 or so coming up, I reckon.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
remember,
Just 3 down.
3 down.
1,
tick,
2,
tick, tick.
3.
And remember, Flash and Flash Drive. It's all about the news you need, when you want, how you want. See you next week.
See ya.